The moment that changed everything. Do you know what real strength looks like when no cameras are rolling? Have you ever seen a smile hide a storm? No one can understand. Sometimes the quietest breakdowns happen in the safest arms. It was supposed to be a simple reunion interview, just laughter, memories, and a few old movie clips. The studio lights were warm, and the crowd was alive with admiration. People had waited years to see them together again, Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves, two people whose calm friendship had survived fame, loss, and time itself. The host wanted a few fun stories, maybe a harmless confession or two. But no one expected the silence that would later fill that room. When Sandra walked in, her smile looked perfect. The kind that had carried her through decades of public life. Yet something about her eyes felt distant, almost fragile. Keanu noticed it first. He always did. He greeted her with his gentle nod, that quiet respect he was known for. No unnecessary touch, no loud energy, just presence. And sometimes, that was all someone needed to feel safe again. As the show went on, everything seemed fine. They shared stories about their first movie together, the long shoots, the jokes between scenes. The crowd laughed. Sandra laughed too, but Keanu could see her hands trembling slightly. It was the kind of trembling only someone who has carried too much for too long can hide. She kept pressing her fingers together under the table, trying to steady them. The host didn't notice, but Keanu did. And he waited. The moment came when the host showed a short montage, clips of Sandra's late partner, a man she had loved deeply. The screen filled with images of laughter, life, and memories that time had already begun to fade. The audience sighed, some even smiled. But Sandra froze. Her breath caught, her face stiffened, and for a few seconds she didn't move at all. Everyone thought she was just emotional. But Keanu saw her hands tighten into fists. She whispered something under her breath, too soft for the microphones. Keanu leaned closer, just enough for her to know he was there. She looked at him. 1 second of eye contact that said everything she couldn't say aloud. Grief, exhaustion, fear of losing composure in front of millions. And then, it happened. Her shoulders trembled, and the tears she had held for years finally broke free. The crowd went silent. No one moved. The cameras were still rolling, but for a moment it didn't matter. Sandra covered her face, trying to hide her breakdown, but Keanu gently placed his hand on her shoulder. Not to comfort in a dramatic way, but to remind her that she didn't have to pretend. His calm presence stopped the chaos inside her. She leaned slightly toward him, and when her body gave in, he caught her before she could fall apart completely. The host tried to speak, but Keanu's quiet glance told him not to. He didn't say a single word. He just held her, steady and patient, letting her breathe again. The room was filled with silence so deep that even the cameras seemed to hesitate. The audience didn't know whether to clap, cry, or look away. But something powerful was happening, a moment of raw humanity, unfiltered and real. When Sandra finally looked up, her voice cracked. She apologized to the audience, saying she didn't mean to lose control. But Keanu shook his head softly and whispered something only she could hear. Whatever he said made her close her eyes and smile through the tears. It was small, almost invisible, but it changed everything in that room. She sat up straighter, wiped her face, and thanked everyone for understanding. But deep inside, something had shifted. She was done pretending to be unbreakable. After the show, the crew gathered around to check on her. She insisted she was fine, but Keanu stayed behind. He knew that kind of pain doesn't vanish when the lights go off. As everyone left the stage, he walked with her through the empty corridors, both silent. The air felt heavy, filled with unsaid words. Finally, she stopped near the exit and whispered, "I didn't think I'd cry like that." He smiled gently and said, "That's because you've been holding it for too long." Those words broke the last wall she had. She turned to him and said, "How do you always stay so calm, Keanu? How do you keep your peace when everything hurts?" His answer was simple. "I don't try to stay calm," he said. "I just stop fighting what I feel. Peace comes when you stop resisting pain." She stood there for a long moment, looking at him as if trying to memorize that line. Something about it felt like medicine she had been searching for. It wasn't pity. It wasn't advice. It was truth. And in that truth, she found a strange kind of strength. Maybe she didn't need to hide her vulnerability anymore. Maybe breaking down wasn't weakness after all. As they stepped outside, the night air was cool and gentle. Reporters were waiting, flashes ready, questions lined up. Keanu quietly told her to stay close. He guided her through the chaos, shielding her from the noise with the calm of a man who had seen too much, yet learned to bow to life instead of fighting it. She looked at him, not as a co-star or old friend, but as someone who reminded her that even the strongest hearts are allowed to bend. That night, when Sandra went home, she sat by the window with a cup of tea. The city lights blurred in her tears again, but this time, she didn't hide them. She replayed his words in her mind, over and over, until they began to feel like her own. Peace comes when you stop resisting pain. She whispered them into the quiet night, like a promise to herself. For the first time in years, she let herself cry freely, not because she was weak, but because she finally understood that healing begins where pretending ends. And just when she thought the night had ended, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Keanu. It said only 2 words. "Tomorrow morning?" Followed by a small sunrise emoji. She smiled through her tears, not knowing what he meant. But something in her heart told her that tomorrow would be the beginning of something she had long forgotten. Peace. Yet what awaited her the next morning was something neither of them expected. Something that would test their bond, their patience, and the quiet strength they both carried inside. The sunrise they didn't expect. Do you know what it means when someone reaches out at the right time? Have you ever felt a small message heal something no one could see? Sometimes the gentlest invitation hides the beginning of everything you were afraid to face. Sandra barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the studio, lights, the frozen faces of the audience, the moment her strength cracked in front of the world. She had lived decades learning to hold it together, to smile when the world expected it, to laugh when her heart was breaking. But Keanu's calmness, his silent understanding, had stirred something in her. She didn't know if it was comfort or confusion, maybe both. The message he sent, "Tomorrow morning," echoed in her thoughts. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't romantic. It was simple, quiet, and strangely grounding, like a door half open, waiting for her to decide. She didn't reply until dawn, when the first orange light filled her window. She typed one word, "Okay," and stared at it before hitting send. A few hours later, she met him at a small cafe on the edge of the city. It wasn't a celebrity spot. No paparazzi, no noise, just the faint sound of a street violinist playing somewhere nearby. Keanu was already there, sitting by the window, wearing a dark jacket and that familiar stillness that always made people feel safe. When she walked in, he smiled. Not the rehearsed kind for cameras, but the kind that said, "You showed up, and that's enough." She sat down across from him. For a few minutes, they didn't talk. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was healing. It was the kind of silence where words weren't needed because both already understood too much. Finally, she said, "I don't know why I cried yesterday. Maybe it was everything." He looked at her and said softly, "Maybe it was time." She nodded, sipping her coffee. "You make it sound so easy," she whispered. "Just letting go. But I've built my life holding everything in place. He leaned back, looking out the window before answering. "Holding on makes sense when the storm hasn't passed," he said. "But sometimes we forget the storm ended years ago, and we're still gripping the walls like it's raging outside." She looked at him, startled by how perfectly his words described her life. Every movie, every interview, every carefully held smile. She had been surviving storms that no longer existed. She had become a master of pretending, and no one had noticed how heavy that crown had become. They talked for hours, not about work, not about fame, but about silence, loss, and the strange loneliness that follows success. She told him about her fears of fading relevance, of losing herself in the roles people expected her to play. He listened without interrupting, just letting her unravel years of guarded thoughts. And when she finished, he said, "The world doesn't need you to be perfect. It just needs you to be real." For a second, she wanted to laugh. How could he say that so calmly when the whole industry worshipped perfection? But his eyes didn't move. They were steady, patient, and kind. She realized he wasn't preaching. He was living it. He had always chosen silence over noise, humility over fame. And somehow, that made his presence louder than any performance could. As they left the cafe, Keanu suggested a walk by the park nearby. It was early, the sun soft and golden, the world still quiet. They walked slowly, watching children run, birds scatter, and an old couple feeding pigeons with wrinkled hands. Something about the simplicity of it all made Sandra feel small, not in a bad way, but in a peaceful one. "You ever think about how none of this will last?" she asked suddenly. "The lights, the applause, the fame, it's all gone the moment the camera stops." He smiled. "That's why you make sure the moments between takes are real," he said, "because those are the only ones that stay." She looked down, thinking about the moments she had missed chasing perfection. The missed birthdays, the unspoken apologies, the people she never called back. She had been chasing everything except peace, and now, standing next to him, peace didn't feel like a dream anymore. It felt like something she could finally touch. As the morning passed, Keanu received a call. His expression changed slightly, serious but calm. After hanging up, he looked at her and said, "There's something I need to do. Would you come with me?" She hesitated for a second but nodded. They took his car, driving quietly through winding streets until they reached a small rehabilitation center outside the city. It wasn't fancy, just a plain building surrounded by gardens. Sandra didn't understand why they were there until he explained softly, "A friend of mine has been here for a while. He used to work on one of my early films. I visit him every month." They walked inside. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and wildflowers from the nearby garden. Patients sat quietly in the courtyard, some reading, others staring into the distance. Keanu greeted almost everyone, remembering names, shaking hands, smiling genuinely. Sandra followed speechless. This wasn't charity for the cameras. This was something deeper, a private ritual of kindness he never spoke about. When they reached the last bench, an older man looked up, his hands trembling slightly. "You came," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. Keanu smiled and nodded. "I promised, didn't I?" They sat with him for an hour, listening to stories of regret, recovery, and small victories. Sandra felt her throat tighten. She had spent years surrounded by noise, fame, expectations, deadlines, and here was a man grateful just to feel sunlight on his face. When he thanked her for visiting, she felt tears threaten again. After they left, Sandra was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Do you do this often?" Keanu shrugged lightly. "As often as I can," he said. "People remember your movies for a few years, but they remember your kindness for life." His words stayed with her the entire drive back. She thought about her breakdown on stage, the tears, the shame she had felt. But now, it all looked different. Maybe breaking down wasn't a failure. Maybe it was the door that opened her to see things she had forgotten. Simple, real things. When they reached her home, he stopped the car and turned toward her. "You're going to get calls today," he said. "People will ask questions about yesterday. They'll want your reaction. Don't give them performance. Give them honesty." She nodded, understanding. She opened the door, but paused before stepping out. "Keanu," she said softly, "why do you care so much?" He smiled faintly. Because once someone cared when I thought no one should. She didn't ask more. She didn't need to. There was something in his tone, a memory, a pain, a story he wasn't ready to share. She stepped out, closed the door, and watched him drive away. She felt a strange calm settle over her heart, as if she had been given something priceless but invisible. That afternoon, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Interviews, producers, journalists, everyone wanted her comment on what had happened. She ignored them all until one message came from her old publicist. They want you on a live show tonight to talk about it. It could be good for your image. For a moment, she considered saying yes. It was what she always did, control the narrative, manage the image. But this time she paused. She thought of Keanu's words. Don't give them performance, give them honesty. So instead of going to the show, she sat by her window again, phone in hand, and posted something simple. Yesterday was not a breakdown. It was a reminder that being human is not weakness. Thank you to those who understand. She turned the phone off after that. Within minutes, messages flooded in from strangers across the world. People thanking her, people telling her they cried too, people saying her moment gave them permission to feel again. As she read them later that night, one message stood out. It wasn't from a fan. It was from an unknown number, but she knew instantly who it was. You did good today, it said. But this is only the beginning. Her heart raced slightly. The beginning of what? She smiled and typed back. What do you mean? But no reply came. Not that night. Not the next morning. And just as she began to wonder what he meant, her assistant knocked on the door holding an envelope. This was dropped off for you, she said. Inside was a photograph. Old, slightly faded. It showed a much younger Sandra and Keanu on set, laughing between takes. On the back, one line written in his calm handwriting. Meet me where this photo was taken. Her breath caught. That photo was from a remote filming location years ago. The same place where they had first built their friendship. She looked at the clock. It was already sunset. If she left now, she could reach it by morning. She hesitated only for a moment before packing a small bag and walking out the door. Whatever waited for her there, she knew one thing. It wasn't about fame or image or old memories. It was something deeper, something real, and as the night stretched long ahead of her, she whispered to herself the words that had begun to change her life. Peace comes when you stop resisting pain. But as she drove into the darkness, she had no idea that the next sunrise would reveal the one truth Keanu had never shared, a truth that would shake everything she thought she knew about him. The truth he never spoke. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that silence spoke louder than words? Have you ever followed a feeling without knowing where it would lead you? Sometimes the path to healing begins in the shadow of another's pain. The road stretched endlessly before her, a ribbon of silver beneath a sleeping sky. Sandra drove through the night with only the hum of the engine and the memory of Keanu's calm voice keeping her company. She didn't know what she would find when she arrived. She only knew she couldn't ignore the pull. The photograph lay beside her on the passenger seat, its edges worn, its laughter frozen in time. That picture held something, a memory, a message, maybe even a secret. By the time dawn broke, the horizon was painted in soft gold and violet. She reached the place just as the sun began to rise. It was an old cabin by a quiet lake, surrounded by tall pines that whispered in the morning wind. She remembered it instantly. The way the light used to fall on the water during filming, the smell of pine and damp soil, the calm between takes. His motorcycle was parked outside. She stepped out slowly, heart steady but uncertain. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and dew. The wooden door of the cabin was slightly open. She pushed it gently and stepped in. Keanu was sitting by the fireplace, a cup of coffee in his hand, staring into the flames. He looked up when she entered and smiled faintly. You came, he said. You didn't really give me a choice, she replied softly, closing the door behind her. For a while, they didn't speak. The quiet of the room filled every corner. She noticed small things. A stack of notebooks on the table, a guitar leaning against the wall, and photographs scattered across a shelf. But these weren't movie stills or glamorous portraits. They were ordinary. People smiling, places that looked peaceful, handwritten notes pinned beside them. "What is all this?" she asked, walking closer. He looked at the photos, then at her. "Stories," he said. "People I've met. Lives that touched mine. Some of them you'd never know existed, but they changed me." She picked up one photo of a young man smiling beside a car. On the back, there was a single word written, "Forgiven." She looked at Keanu, confused. He sighed softly. "That man hit my sister's car years ago," he said. "She survived, but barely. He didn't. For years, I hated him for it. I thought forgiveness meant weakness. Then I realized it was the only thing that could stop the pain from owning me." Sandra felt a chill run through her. She had always admired his calm, but now she saw where it came from. It wasn't peace born of luck. It was peace carved out of grief. "You never told anyone," she whispered. He shook his head. "People don't need to know everything to understand kindness," he said. "Sometimes the most important stories are the ones you never tell." She sat down across from him, her eyes softening. "Is this why you brought me here?" He nodded slowly. "Yesterday, when you broke down, it reminded me of something," he said. "How easy it is to hide behind strength. I wanted you to see that peace isn't about staying unshaken. It's about learning to breathe even when everything inside you trembles." His words sank deep, finding a place she didn't know still existed. For the first time, she didn't feel embarrassed about her breakdown. She felt human. They spent the morning walking along the lake. The water shimmered like glass, reflecting the quiet sky. Every step felt lighter, as if she was walking away from something invisible. Keanu told her about his sister's recovery, about how he used to come here when the world felt too loud. He called it his place of remembering. "Remembering what?" she asked. "That I can't save everyone," he said, "but I can show up for someone who needs to remember they're not alone." Those words lingered in the air, delicate yet heavy with truth. She looked at him, realizing how much he carried behind that quiet smile the world adored. The losses, the heartbreaks, the moments of solitude, all woven into a calm that felt unshakable because it was built on acceptance, not denial. When they returned to the cabin, Sandra noticed a stack of letters tied with a thin red ribbon on the table. She glanced at them, and he said, "They're letters I never sent." She hesitated, unsure if she should ask more, but he nodded as if giving her permission. She opened one. It was addressed to his late partner, words full of grief and gratitude. She read the first few lines, then stopped, feeling her throat tighten. "You never sent them?" she asked quietly. He smiled, faint but warm. "No need," he said. "Some things are meant to stay between the heart and the wind." They spent hours talking, not about movies, not about fame, but about silence, about loss, about learning to live gently. Sandra found herself opening up in ways she never had before. She spoke of her fears, her regrets, the emptiness that success never filled. Keanu listened the way few people do, not to reply, but to understand. As the day grew older, they sat on the porch watching the sun drift lower. She looked at him and said softly, "You carry pain like it's a quiet friend." He smiled. "Maybe it is," he said. "Pain teaches humility. It makes you listen more and speak less. It reminds you that everyone is fighting something invisible." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't from sorrow. They were from relief. She had spent so long trying to be untouchable, and now she realized that her humanity was the most beautiful part of her. When night fell, they lit a small fire by the lake. The stars scattered above them like forgotten wishes. Keanu handed her a small notebook. "Write something," he said. "Something you've never said out loud." She hesitated, then began to write. Her hand trembled at first, but the words came. She wrote about the loneliness behind fame, about pretending to be okay for everyone else, about missing the simplicity of being unseen. When she finished, She looked up and found him watching her with that calm, knowing gaze. "You know what's strange?" she said softly. "For the first time, I don't feel like I'm performing." He smiled. "That's the point," he said. "You don't have to perform to be loved." They sat in silence after that, the kind that feels sacred. The lake reflected the firelight, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called softly. Sandra leaned back, feeling the quiet wrap around her like a blanket. For the first time in years, her mind wasn't racing, her heart wasn't guarded. She felt present. But as the fire flickered lower, Keanu's expression changed. He seemed lost in thought, eyes distant, almost haunted. Sandra noticed it instantly. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated before answering. "There's something I haven't told you," he said quietly. "Something I've been meaning to, but I didn't know how." She turned to face him fully, her heart suddenly tense. "What is it?" He stared into the flames, his voice barely above a whisper. "The man in that rehabilitation center, the one we visited yesterday, he wasn't just someone I helped. He's connected to something that happened long ago. Something that changed everything for me." Sandra frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He looked up, and for the first time she saw a shadow of pain cross his calm eyes. "He's the reason I stopped believing in second chances," he said. "Until now." The words hit her like a cold wave. Before she could ask more, he stood up and said, "I'll tell you tomorrow. It's a story that has to be told where it began." She watched him walk into the cabin, his silhouette framed by the faint firelight. The night suddenly felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. As she sat by the dying flames, she realized she was no longer afraid of pain. She was afraid of what she might discover about him, about the past that had shaped the man she thought she knew so well. When the wind rose, she whispered his own words into the darkness, as if to steady herself. "Peace comes when you stop resisting pain." But she knew deep down that the peace he carried had a price, and by morning, she would learn what it truly cost him. The story that haunted his silence: have you ever looked into someone's calmness and realized it was built on pain? Have you ever felt that peace can be both a gift and a wound? Sometimes, the people who save others are the ones who never healed themselves. The night at the cabin felt longer than any Sandra could remember. She barely slept. The silence of the woods was deep, the kind that held secrets rather than comfort. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of the wind, reminded her that Keanu had said something that changed the air between them. "The man in the rehabilitation center is the reason I stopped believing in second chances." When the first light entered the cabin, she found him sitting outside, his eyes on the lake. The fire from last night had gone cold, but he hadn't moved. He looked like a statue carved out of stillness. She walked up quietly, wrapped in a blanket, unsure if he even noticed her presence. He finally spoke, voice low, almost like he was speaking to the water. "You deserve to know," he said. "After yesterday, after everything, you should understand why I am the way I am." She nodded, waiting. "Years ago," he began, "before everything became this quiet, I had a brother." The words stunned her. He had never mentioned a brother. In all their years of friendship, not once. "His name was Elijah," he continued. "He was younger than me. Bright, kind, the kind of person who believed the world was good no matter how often it proved otherwise. He wanted to be a musician. I helped him record his first few songs in a tiny apartment studio." He smiled faintly, eyes still fixed on the lake. "He used to say that music was the only way to make pain sound beautiful." Sandra listened, her chest tightening. "One night," he said, "he called me. I was on set, tired, distracted. He said he wanted to talk, said it was important. I told him I'd call back after filming. I didn't." His voice faltered for the first time. He got on his motorcycle. That night, drove across the city to see me, but he never made it. A drunk driver hit him on the freeway. Sandra's breath caught. She wanted to say something, but no words came. That driver, Keanu said quietly, was the man you saw in that rehabilitation center? She froze, eyes widening. The same man? He nodded slowly. He survived. Barely. When I found out, I wanted to hate him. I wanted him to suffer. I visited him once, years ago, when he was still in the hospital. He couldn't speak properly, couldn't remember much. He looked at me and said, "I'm sorry," over and over again. I walked out. I didn't go back for years. The air grew heavier. Even the lake seemed still. Then one day, he continued, I got a letter from the center. They said he was asking to see me. I almost ignored it. But something in me said I should go. When I did, he was sitting in a wheelchair, thinner than I remembered. He looked at me and said, "You don't have to forgive me. I just wanted to thank you for not giving up on life after I ruined it." Keanu paused, voice trembling softly. And that's when I realized he wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was giving it to me, because all those years I blame myself more than him. The words hit Sandra deep. She felt tears sting her eyes, not just for his pain, but for the unbearable humanity in it. "You blamed yourself for not answering his call," she whispered. He nodded. "For not being there. For letting the last words I said to my brother be, 'I'll call you later.'" He looked at her finally, eyes raw but calm. "That's what peace cost me. Learning to forgive the man who took him and learning to forgive myself for not saving him." For a long time, neither spoke. The morning light spilled across the lake, golden and soft, as if nature itself was trying to ease their silence. Sandra sat beside him, tears running freely now. "You've been carrying that for so long," she said quietly. "Some weights don't disappear," he replied. "They just teach you how to walk slower." She wanted to say something comforting, something meaningful, but she knew anything she said would feel too small. So instead, she reached out and took his hand. They sat that way for a long time, saying nothing, sharing the same quiet that had once been his prison, but now felt like a bridge between them. As the sun climbed higher, he said softly, "That's why I brought you here. I saw that look in your eyes yesterday, the same look I used to have. The one that says you've been pretending for too long. I wanted you to see that you don't need to hide behind strength. You just need to stop fighting your pain." She nodded, her voice breaking slightly. "And you?" He smiled faintly. "I still fight it sometimes, but less now." They spent the day together, walking through the woods, remembering stories, laughing softly at old memories. But even in their laughter, there was a layer of understanding that hadn't been there before. A shared knowledge of loss, of forgiveness, of the quiet bravery it takes to keep living after your world falls apart. By evening, they sat by the fire again. The flames danced gently, painting their faces with flickers of light. Sandra looked at him, and for the first time, she saw not the actor, not the man the world admired, but the boy who lost his brother and chose compassion over bitterness. "Keanu," she said softly, "you know what I think?" He looked at her. "What?" "I think your brother would be proud of you," he smiled, eyes glistening. "I think so too." They sat in silence, listening to the fire crackle until the stars appeared again. And just when the peace began to settle around them, Sandra noticed something, his hand trembling slightly. "Are you okay?" she asked. He hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "There's one more thing I need to tell you," he said. "Something I haven't told anyone." Her heart tightened. "What is it?" His eyes lowered. "The accident wasn't the only reason I stopped believing in second chances," he said quietly. "It was what happened after." "After?" she whispered. He looked up at her, his calmness cracking for the first time. "I found out that my brother's last song, the one he recorded for me, disappeared from the studio that night. Someone stole it. I thought it was lost forever. But a few months ago, I heard a familiar melody playing in a small independent movie soundtrack. And when I checked, the song was there, slightly altered, but it was his." Sandra frowned. "So someone used it without credit?" He nodded. The name credited as songwriter. Was yours. The words hit her like lightning. She froze, her breath catching in disbelief. Mine, she whispered. He nodded again, eyes soft but unreadable. I don't think you did it knowingly. But someone on your old team might have sold it years ago. I never wanted to bring it up, until I saw you break down that day. It felt like maybe it was time to let the truth breathe. The room felt colder now. The fire crackled, but the warmth didn't reach her. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. Keanu, she said, her voice trembling. I never knew, he smiled sadly. I know. I didn't tell you to blame you. I told you because I realized forgiveness isn't complete until it's tested. She stared at him, tears blurring her sight. And did you forgive me? He looked at her with that same quiet depth that had carried him through everything. I forgave you the moment I decided to stop looking for someone to blame. Sandra's tears finally fell. She covered her mouth, shaking her head. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I would have never. He interrupted softly. I know. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was real, fragile, human. As the fire died down, they sat side by side again, both staring into the dark. Not as two people trying to heal alone, but as two souls learning that pain shared is pain transformed. And somewhere deep inside her, she knew this moment would change everything, not just for her, but for the way the world would see them if the truth ever came out. The night stretched on, and neither spoke again. But in the quiet, forgiveness finally took shape. Not as a word, but as a breath. And when dawn came, Sandra woke to find the cabin empty. Keanu was gone. Only a small note lay beside her on the table. Some journeys are meant to finish alone, so others can begin again. Her hands trembled as she read it, the words blurring through her tears. She stepped outside, the morning wind brushing her face, and whispered to the empty lake. This isn't the end. And somewhere far away on a road lined with rising light, Keanu whispered the same words under his breath. The road back to forgiveness. Have you ever realized that peace isn't found in stillness, but in pursuit? Have you ever felt the weight of someone's silence heavier than any word? Sometimes, losing someone's presence is the only way to find your own truth. Sandra stood at the edge of the lake, the morning mist curling around her like a veil. The note in her hand felt small compared to the ache in her chest. Keanu was gone, and his absence filled the space louder than his quiet ever had. She read his words again. Some journeys are meant to finish alone, so others can begin again. But she couldn't accept that this was the end. Not after everything he had shared. Not after what she had learned. She went back inside the cabin and looked around. The place felt empty now, yet traces of him lingered everywhere. His notebook on the table, a half-burned candle, the faint smell of coffee. She found herself drawn to the stack of letters tied with a red ribbon. One of them was addressed differently. Instead of a name, it simply said, "To whoever carries the guilt." Her heart tightened. She opened it carefully, hands trembling. Inside, the letter read, "I don't believe people steal out of malice. Most steal because they've forgotten what they already have. If you're reading this and you took what wasn't yours, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to live without peace." The handwriting was unmistakably Keanu's. She pressed the paper to her chest, tears welling again. Forgiveness. He lived it, breathed it, gave it freely, even when the world gave him pain. But something in her heart refused to let this story end in silence. If someone on her team had taken his brother's song, then it wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about truth. By noon, she was back in the city. The noise felt sharper, the lights too bright. She drove straight to her old recording archives, a dusty warehouse where years of material had been stored. The manager, an old friend, was surprised to see her. "Sandra, it's been ages," he said, smiling. "What brings you here?" "I need to check something," she replied softly. "A song from years ago, something that might have been registered under my name by mistake." They spent hours combing through files, old recordings, and contracts. Finally, they found it. A digital file labeled Demo Uncredited Melody, 1999. When they played it, her breath caught. The tune was hauntingly familiar, gentle, raw, full of emotion. It was his brother's song. She remembered hearing it faintly years ago when one of her early projects was being produced. "Who uploaded this?" she asked. The manager scrolled through the old record. "A man named Arthur Bentley. He worked for your agent back then. Sold a few unregistered demos to smaller studios." She froze. Arthur Bentley, her former sound technician. She hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. Her chest tightened with a strange mix of anger and sorrow. She thanked the manager and walked out. That night, she found Arthur's contact online. He was retired now, living quietly outside Los Angeles. She hesitated before calling, her hand trembling over the phone. When he answered, his voice was weaker, older. "Arthur," she said carefully, "this is Sandra Bullock." A long pause, then a sigh. "I was wondering when someone would call me about that," he said softly. "So it's true," she whispered. He didn't deny it. "It was years ago. Your label was behind schedule, and a man approached me with a demo, said it was unregistered. I sold it for quick cash. I didn't know whose it was until much later. By then, it was too late. The company had already used it. I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid." Sandra closed her eyes, pain flooding through her. "That song belonged to Keanu's brother," she said quietly. "I know," Arthur replied. "And I've lived with that guilt for 20 years. The line went silent for a moment. Then she said softly, "Keanu forgave you, even without knowing your name. He wrote you a letter." Arthur's breath caught. What?" She told him what the letter said. When she finished, there was only the sound of him quietly crying on the other end. "I don't deserve that kind of mercy," he whispered. "None of us do," she said gently. But he gave it anyway. After she hung up, Sandra sat in her car for a long time, staring out at the city lights. Everything felt heavier now, yet also clearer. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the wound. It was about freeing yourself from the cage it built. The next day, she made a decision. She called a producer she trusted and said, "I want to re-record that song, properly this time, with full credit to Elijah Reeves." The producer hesitated. "You're sure? This could stir old things up." "Some truths deserve light," she said firmly. A week later, she stood in a small recording studio, headphones on, the music filling the air. The melody wrapped around her like a ghost, tender, broken, but beautiful. She recorded the song with quiet emotion, every note a tribute, every breath a silent apology. When she finished, she didn't feel guilt. She felt gratitude. The song was released quietly, credited to Elijah Reeves, produced by Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. She didn't tell him in advance. She wanted him to discover it the way his brother's music was meant to be found, unexpectedly. But truthfully, 2 weeks later, she received a message from an unknown number. "I heard the song." Her heart skipped. She didn't need to see the name to know who it was. Then another message followed. He would have smiled. She smiled through tears, her heart finally at peace. She typed back, "You taught me how to stop resisting pain." There was no reply. But she didn't need one. Silence, she had learned, could be its own kind of answer. Days turned into weeks. The song began to spread, not as a viral hit, but as something people whispered about. A melody that carried healing, forgiveness, and love without spectacle. Fans didn't know the full story, but they felt something in it that words couldn't explain. Then one morning, she received an envelope. No address, no signature. Inside was a single photograph. The same lake from the cabin with the sun rising over it. On the back, in Keanu's handwriting, it said, "You finished what I couldn't." Her tears fell freely, but they weren't heavy anymore. They were light, cleansing, full of quiet joy. She placed the photograph on her wall, right beside her favorite award, not as a symbol of success, but of truth. That evening, she drove back to the cabin. The lake was calm, the sky painted in gold and rose. She sat on the old porch, feeling the peace she had once only seen in him. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like an actress trying to live up to her roles. She just felt human. As the sun began to set, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Keanu." A breeze rose gently, carrying the scent of pine and water. And in that moment, she felt him there. Not beside her, but within her. A quiet reminder that some connections don't fade, they transform. But when she stood to leave, she noticed something near the cabin door. A small box wrapped in paper, with her name written neatly on top. Her heart raced as she picked it up and unfolded the note attached. One last truth remains. If you're ready to know, open this by the water at sunrise. Her fingers tightened around the box. She looked at the horizon, where the last light of day was fading into twilight. Whatever was inside, she knew it would change everything again, and this time, she was ready. The sunrise of truth. Have you ever stood at the edge of peace, afraid to step inside? Have you ever known that the end of one story is really the beginning of another? Sometimes, the hardest truth is not the one that hurts, but the one that heals. The lake was silent again. Only the soft breath of morning wind moved through the pines, and the sky slowly shifted from deep blue to gold. Sandra stood barefoot on the wooden pier, the small box in her hands. The note was still wrapped around it. Open this by the water at sunrise. She looked at the horizon, where the first light began to appear, trembling over the surface of the lake like a promise. Her heart beat slowly, each pulse echoing against memories she couldn't escape. His voice, his calmness, his eyes when he forgave her, the way he disappeared without goodbye. Everything that had happened led to this moment. She knelt by the water and opened the box. Inside there was no jewelry, no letter of farewell, no grand gesture. Just a small flash drive, a folded page, and a thin silver chain with a pendant that carried the engraved initials E.R., Elijah Reeves. She unfolded the page first. It was written in Keanu's neat handwriting, steady and calm. You once asked me how I stay peaceful. The truth is, I don't. I let peace find me when I stop running from pain. Inside this drive is something my brother made, a song he never released. I've carried it for years, afraid it would break me if I heard it again. But you reminded me that healing is not forgetting. It's remembering without fear. So listen. And when you do, don't listen for me. Listen for yourself, because everything you've been searching for is already within you. Her hands trembled as she held the flash drive. She walked back into the cabin, where sunlight now filtered through the curtains. The old radio system still worked. She plugged in the drive and pressed play. Soft piano notes filled the room, gentle, haunting, alive. It was Elijah's voice, young and full of hope. The lyrics were simple, almost childlike, yet every word carried weight. I waited for peace to come to me, but it was there in every tear I'd hide. I searched for light beyond the sea, but it was burning quietly inside. Sandra sat down, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. The song wasn't just music, it was a message, a mirror, a bridge between broken hearts. She could almost feel Keanu's presence in every note, as if he was there beside her, listening for the first time, too. When the last note faded, silence took over. But it wasn't empty. It was whole, full, sacred. She whispered into that silence. You found your peace, didn't you? Outside, the sun climbed higher, and the reflection on the lake shimmered like glass. She stepped out again, the pendant still in her hand, and placed it gently on the water. It floated for a moment before slowly sinking beneath the surface, the ripples widening like circles of memory. Thank you, Elijah, she whispered. And thank you, Keanu, for teaching me how to live again. She stood there for a long time, watching the morning unfold. Every sound, every breeze, every glimmer of light felt like a quiet reminder that nothing truly ends. It only transforms. The pain that once chained her had softened into gratitude. The guilt that once silenced her had turned into understanding. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Her heart skipped just for a moment as she opened it. I saw the sunrise. You were right. It's beautiful when you stop resisting it. No name, no signature. But she didn't need one. Her smile came through tears, steady and real. Later that week, she appeared at a small charity event, one Keanu had supported quietly for years. She stood before the crowd, her voice steady, her heart open. There's something I've learned, she said softly. The world teaches us to chase success, but not peace. Yet peace is what holds everything together. And sometimes it begins the moment we stop pretending to be unbreakable. The audience was silent, listening, moved not by fame, but by honesty. Her words were no longer performance. They were truth, lived and earned. After the event, a little girl approached her with a shy smile. "Miss Sandra," she said, "my mom said your story made her forgive my dad." "Thank you." Sandra knelt down, her eyes glistening. "Tell your mom she gave herself the gift, not me," she said gently as she hugged the girl. She felt something shift inside, a closing of a circle, the completion of a promise. In the following months, she visited the lake often, not to remember pain, but to honor what it had taught her. Sometimes she would sit on the same porch with a notebook, writing words that no one else would read. And every time she wrote, she felt his voice echo somewhere deep within her. Peace comes when you stop resisting pain. The story of the song spread quietly. People didn't know all the details, but they felt something in it, a calm that reached beyond music. It became known as the Sunrise Melody, a tribute to loss, forgiveness, and love that asked for nothing in return. One morning, as she packed to leave the cabin for the last time, she found one final note tucked under the windowsill. Faint, yellowed, probably left there long ago. The handwriting was unmistakable. "One day, you'll look at the world and see no difference between light and shadow. That's when you'll know you found peace." She smiled, folded the note, and whispered, "I'm there." As she stepped outside, the sun broke through the clouds, warm and golden, touching everything with quiet grace. The lake shone like a mirror, reflecting not her face, but her peace. She stood still for a long moment, then turned away from the cabin, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Every wound had found its reason, every tear had found its meaning, and somewhere far beyond the hills, under the same rising light, Keanu stood on another shore, watching the same sun. His expression calm, his heart finally light, two souls, connected not by tragedy but by truth, watching the same dawn from different places, both finally free, and in that silence the world felt whole again.